what elites desperately hide from you, Bonhoeffer's stupidity theory. What if I told you that the greatest threat to freedom isn't corruption or oppression or even violence, it's stupidity? Not the funny kind of stupidity you see in memes or sitcoms, but a terrifying, systemic stupidity that's engineered, maintained, and strategically used to keep entire populations passive, obedient, and blind to what's really happening. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a German theologian and philosopher who was executed by the Nazis for his resistance, saw this early. He dared to say something few have the courage to say even now, that stupidity is more dangerous than evil. And that's exactly what the elites never want you to understand, because if you do, the entire structure of power begins to shake. Now, let me be clear, Bonhoeffer didn't mean stupidity as a lack of intelligence, but he wasn't talking about IQ or education. That's the trap most people fall into when they hear the word. What Bonhoeffer meant was something much deeper, more disturbing. He was talking about a kind of moral and existential blindness, a condition where a person's ability to think critically, to seek truth, to act from conscience, becomes paralyzed. And the scariest part, it's not natural, it's manufactured. It's cultivated by systems of propaganda, distraction, and fear. The elites don't just tolerate this kind of stupidity, they rely on it. Because a population that can't think for itself is a population that won't resist.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Think about it. We live in the most connected, information-rich age in human history. But you can access centuries of wisdom, science, philosophy, and truth in seconds. And yet, we're drowning in misinformation, clickbait, and shallow outrage. Why? Because the system isn't built to make you wise. It's built to keep you reactive, to keep you consuming, to keep you obedient. And how do you do that most effectively? You don't have to install a dictator. You just have to make people stupid enough to never question what's right in front of them. Bonhoeffer observed this during the rise of Nazi Germany. He saw how ordinary people, decent, educated, church-going citizens became passive tools of a monstrous regime, not because they were evil, but because they stopped thinking. They surrendered their moral judgment to the collective. They let the slogans, the uniforms, the newsreels do their thinking for them. And Bonhoeffer realized that once stupidity takes hold in this way, you can't fight it with logic. You can't argue someone out of it, because it's not just a flaw in reasoning, it's a surrender of responsibility. It's a soul-level abdication. Here's the part that should make you sit up straight. Bonhoeffer said that stupidity is not a psychological problem, it's a sociological one. In other words, people don't become stupid in isolation, they become stupid in groups, and through culture, through institutions, and through peer pressure, through the slow erosion of personal responsibility. And this is where the elites come in, because they know that the most effective way to control people is not by force, but by making them complicit in their own brainwashing. You don't have to censor every book if you can make people stop reading. You don't have to outlaw truth if you can make people uninterested in discovering it. This should raise a terrifying question in your mind. How much of what I believe is actually mine? How many of your thoughts, your opinions, your values were actually formed through your own reflection, and how many were handed to you, repeated to you, marketed to you until you accepted them as your own? When was the last time you sat with a question so deeply that it made you uncomfortable? When was the last time you changed your mind because the truth demanded it, not because the crowd approved it? Bonhoeffer's theory exposes a core truth that elites desperately hope you never realize, that your greatest weapon is not rebellion or protest, or even technology, it's independent thought. The ability to see clearly, to question deeply, and to act from conscience, even when it's unpopular, especially when it's unpopular. Because once you start thinking for yourself, their power begins to crumble. You become unpredictable, uncontrollable, alive. But here's the twist: the system is already inside you. It's in your habits, your fears, your need to belong. That's why this isn't just a political battle, it's a spiritual one. The real war is not out there. It's in here, and in your mind, in your choices, in your willingness to see the world without illusion, even when it hurts. So let me ask you something dangerous. When you look at your life, your job, your beliefs, your routines, how much of it would remain if you stripped away every external expectation, put every societal script, every cultural reward? Who would be left? Would it still be you? Or would you find that you've been living someone else's life all along? This is why Bonhoeffer's theory matters more now than ever. Because stupidity isn't just a personal flaw, it's a social weapon. And the more you understand it, the more you begin to see it everywhere, in media, in politics, in education, even in the ways we talk about success, truth, and freedom. The architecture of obedience. How systems are designed to produce stupidity. If Bonhoeffer was right, and there's every reason to believe he was, then stupidity isn't just a random flaw in human nature. It's the product of something. It's engineered, manufactured, carefully constructed like a machine, with inputs and outputs, levers and gears. And the systems that surround us, the very institutions we're told to trust, education, media, politics, even entertainment, have become factories for this kind of stupidity. Not the clownish, comedic kind, but the far more dangerous version, the stupidity that looks like conformity, that wears the mask of intelligence, but that repeats slogans with confidence, but never questions the frame they come from. The question we have to ask is this: if stupidity is a result, what's the design behind it? Who builds the architecture of obedience, and why? Let's start with school. The way we're educated is one of the earliest and most powerful ways society molds us to obey. Most schools are not designed to produce thinkers. They're designed to produce workers, people who follow instructions, meet deadlines, memorize facts, and perform for approval. Sit still, raise your hand, color inside the lines. From an early age, we're taught that the goal is not to understand, but to comply. The curriculum is standardized. The testing is standardized. Even the creativity is standardized rubrics for how to be original in the right way. And what happens to those who question the system? They're labeled difficult, disruptive, or underperforming. But maybe they're just awake. This is the first layer of the architecture obedience masked as education. You don't learn how to think, you learn what to think. You don't learn how to ask questions that challenge the system, you learn how to answer questions that reward you for staying inside it. Then comes media. The average person consumes hours of content every day, but very little of it is designed to deepen understanding. Instead, it's designed to generate outrage, distraction, and tribal thinking. It keeps you reactive, You're fed a stream of curated narratives, not to inform you, but to shape you. And when media becomes entertainment, and entertainment becomes ideology, the lines between truth and illusion disappear. You begin to mistake repetition for reality. And the elites, the ones who control these pipelines, know this. They don't need to lie, they just need to flood you with enough noise that you stop caring about what's real. The next layer is political. Think about how most political discourse is framed. Left versus right, red versus blue, us versus them. It's theater. Simplified narratives that reduce complex issues into emotional slogans. And what do they demand of you? Loyalty, not thought. Identity, not inquiry. You don't have time to reflect when you're constantly being baited into outrage. You don't stop to examine the deeper structure when you're locked in an endless battle over the surface. And perhaps most subtly, this architecture extends into culture itself, into your very sense of self. You are taught to seek success in ways that serve the system. You're told to chase security, recognition, consumption. The good life is a life of constant productivity, constant engagement, constant motion. But stillness, silence, reflection, these are seen as lazy, suspicious, even dangerous. Why? Because they create space for truth to emerge. They allow you to hear the thoughts that the system drowns out. They allow you to ask, is this what I really want? When you zoom out, you begin to see it all for what it is, not a conspiracy of evil masterminds, but a self-perpetuating machine. One that doesn't need villains to function, just people who don't think, just people who go along. And that's what Bonhoeffer warned us about. That stupidity, once institutionalized, becomes nearly impossible to fight with reason alone. Because the structure rewards the refusal to think. It protects those who comply and punishes those who question. So what's the solution? You have to become structurally disobedient. Not in a reckless or performative way, but in the deepest, most personal sense. You have to reclaim your capacity for thought, for doubt, for silence. You have to notice when your emotions are being manipulated. You have to feel the moment when a belief is offered to you without evidence and resist the urge to accept it just because it's easier. Let me ask you something. What system are you still unconsciously obeying, even though it no longer aligns with who you are? Is it your job, your politics, your social circle, your definition of success, your silence? Because the systems are only as strong as our cooperation. And the moment enough people wake up, not all, just enough, the architecture begins to crack. The cost of clarity, why thinking for yourself is the most dangerous and liberating thing you can ever do. There's a reason so few people truly think for themselves. Not because they're incapable, but because real thought comes with a price. A steep one. When you start thinking independently, when you begin tearing down the inherited beliefs, the prepackaged ideologies, the socially approved scripts, you don't just change your mind. You change your life. You begin to see the world differently, and that difference isolates you. You start to notice how much of what people say is just repetition, how much of what they value is imitation. And you realize you don't belong, not in the way they want you to. That's the cost of clarity. It burns through illusions, and with it, the comfort they provide. Bonhoeffer understood this cost. He didn't just write about stupidity as a philosopher, he lived through the consequences of seeing clearly when everyone else chose blindness. He watched his own country descend into darkness, not because everyone became evil, but because most people stopped thinking. And he refused to join them. He chose clarity over safety, conscience over conformity, and he paid for it with his life. That's not just a historical anecdote, it's a warning and a blueprint. Because while the specifics of our time may differ, the mechanisms of control remain the same. And so does the cost of resisting them. You see, thinking is dangerous because it breaks the spell. Once you begin asking real questions, what is true? Who benefits from my belief in this? What am I afraid to see? You start undoing the mental framework that society has spent decades building around you. And when that framework collapses, so do the relationships, routines, and realities that depend on it. You might lose friends, you might lose your job, you might lose the sense of certainty that held you together. But what you gain in return is something most people never touch: freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom to stand in truth, even when it costs you everything. Let's be honest, most people don't want that kind of freedom. They want comfort. They want belonging. And so they trade their clarity for consensus. But they keep their heads down, not because they're weak, but because survival often demands it. But you have to ask yourself, is surviving the same as living? Is a life built on silence and self-betrayal really worth preserving? This is the paradox. When you begin thinking for yourself, the world becomes more painful at first. You see the manipulation, the corruption, the absurdity. You see how much suffering is avoidable, how much injustice is normalized, and it hurts. But if you stay with that pain, if you don't run from it, it transforms. That pain becomes power, insight, compassion. You stop reacting and start responding. You stop consuming truth and start embodying it. And here's the secret the elites don't want you to know: one awakened mind is more powerful than 1,000 obedient ones. Not because it's louder, but because it's rooted. A person who sees clearly can't be bought, can't be baited, can't be broken in the same way. They become a threat not by force, but by presence. By simply refusing to play the game by rules designed to keep them asleep. So I'll ask you again, and I want you to really feel this. What is the cost you're willing to pay for clarity? What illusions are you ready to let burn so you can finally live in truth? Because once you see, you cannot unsee. And that's when the real life begins. The final awakening, how Bonhoeffer's warning can save us from ourselves. There's a reason Bonhoeffer's words have not faded with time. They echo now louder than ever, because we are living in a moment where stupidity, not as insult, but as a systemic condition, has become the most effective weapon of control. We are surrounded by noise, addicted to distraction, and afraid of silence. We repost slogans, adopt opinions we haven't earned, and defend systems we don't understand. And all the while we believe we are free. That is the genius of it. The prison is invisible because it looks like participation. But Bonhoeffer's warning is clear: when stupidity becomes institutionalized, when thinking becomes dangerous, and when truth becomes relative, that civilization itself is at risk, not from bombs or tyrants, but from the silent surrender of the human mind. But there is a way back, and it doesn't require revolution as we usually imagine it, not marches or megaphones, but something far more subversive, awakening. And not in the mystical sense, but in the most grounded, urgent way. Awakening means to see what is, without illusion. It is to strip away everything you've been told to believe and stand naked in the raw light of truth. It means asking questions that pierce through the surface. Who benefits from my ignorance? Who profits from my fear? Who thrives when I stay asleep? This is the final awakening, not just of intellect, but of conscience. Because Bonhoeffer never separated thought from morality. For him, to truly think was to take responsibility not just for your opinions, but for your impact. Real thinking leads to action, not always dramatic or loud, but intentional, courageous, grounded in truth, not tribalism. And this is what the elites truly fear, not riots, not hashtags, not viral outrage, but a person who sees through the game and refuses to play by its rules. A person who questions deeply, listens carefully, and acts with clarity. Because that person can't be manipulated. That person can't be seduced by consumerism or paralyzed by fear or recruited into blind obedience. And that person becomes a mirror, reflecting back to society the truth it's been trying to avoid. So what do? You begin. Wherever you are, however small it feels. You challenge your own automatic beliefs. You unplug from the constant feed of noise. You read slowly. You speak carefully. You reclaim your inner authority. And when someone tells you what to think, you ask why. When someone tries to shame you into silence, you ask, who does this serve? Because in the end, Bonhoeffer's theory isn't just a critique, it's a call. A call to become something the modern world desperately needs but rarely rewards: a fully awake, deeply responsible, fiercely compassionate human being. And if enough of us answer that call, the spell breaks, and the fog lifts, the system cracks, and something ancient and powerful returns, not noise, not rage, but wisdom. Because truth doesn't need to shout. It only needs to be heard.